Thank you, Marcy. Our last public discussion of the week will be focused on the board work streams that we've all been working on for several months. Here to moderate the discussion and introduce our facilitator is Ann Simpson, who has been guiding us every step of the way. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasant task this morning to introduce Carrie Dominguez. Some of you met her a year ago when we started this work, and it's very rewarding to look back over the last 12 months and think about all the conversations, all the discussions, all the hard work that's been going on. But I'm also aware that we have some new board members who've got involved in this second stage of the work stream, so thank you to all of you who've been giving your time, your attention, your best to this project, which could not be more important. Something that we know from our investment portfolio is that governance affects performance. The way that an organization is governed will have an impact on whether it's efficient, whether it's effective, whether it can meet its objectives. And that's just as true for CalPERS as it is for any of the companies that we invest in. So the board's decision a year ago to take on the National Association of Corporate Directors to facilitate the evaluation is an example of best practice in itself. And the board, I think, is rightly at the forefront as a leader in the governance field by approaching its self-evaluation using an ACD. It's been a particular pleasure for us to be able to work with Carrie Dominguez. Not only is she on the board of the National Association of Corporate Directors, she's also the president of the Women's Forum in Washington, D.C. She's cited as one of the most influential Hispanic leaders in the country. She has experience in public service, leading the Equal Opportunities Commission, and she also has experience in the state of California serving in public office. So she brings to this project business experience, leadership in the world of governance, but also real insight into how public bodies can best serve their own purposes by improving their governance. So it's been a great pleasure to work with Carrie this year and her team at NACD. So what we're going to do this morning, as Mr. Jones, our president, said, is first of all, Carrie is going to give us a recap. Where did we start on this project? What were we trying to accomplish? And what were the findings from the original self-evaluation? Now, Carrie is the fount of all wisdom on this, because not only did NACD construct a series of confidential online surveys for board members to contribute their thinking to, but she also carried out individual interviews, private interviews with each of the board members who were serving the CalPERS on the CalPERS board at that time. So she is probably has a unique understanding of the issues that were being raised, that were being explored. So coming back to that, I think is going to be very helpful for all of us to sort of check in. What did the evaluation surface? And then the second part, as Marcy said, I will be acting just as the voice, if you like, for the different work streams. We've had 5 work streams working their socks off on a whole range of really important things. So I'm just here to tell you what the work streams have come up with by way of their first round of recommendations for discussion today. And if the board decides to move ahead, we'll come back at a later stage with recommendations for you to take action on. I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that we've handed out the draft code of conduct. Thank you very much, Lexi, for getting all the materials ready. But it appears that the link, which would have given you access through the board diligent book, didn't do its thing. So with that, how grateful are we to have Tim Taylor here, who's actually building a new board book for you called the Insight Tool. And that's, as Marcy said, going to be a critical new resource for board members, because it's going to give you all the materials that you need at your fingertips in a timely manner and greatly improve on the 1,000 pages of paper which tend to float around at a board meeting. So with that, let me hand over to Carrie to take us through where we started on this board evaluation project and to remind us what the highlights were. And then I'll come back and share the findings from the different work streams. So Carrie, over to you.
So thank you very, very much, Anne, for your very generous introduction and for setting the stage so nicely. And good morning, President Jones and members of the board. I'm truly delighted to be back with you. And I have to tell you, almost to the day, this marks a year when CalPERS and NACD began this journey together. It was actually July 18th, 2018. So here we are, July 17th, 2019. So almost to the day that we started this journey together. And it's been a journey to advance your long-term commitment to board leadership and to continuous improvement. And continuous improvement really is a characteristic of high-performing boards. We're never satisfied where we are. We always want to do better, and we know that there are opportunities to do better. And so NACD has been very, very proud to recognize CalPERS on several occasions for your commitment to continuous improvement and for your dedication to board excellence and innovation. And for me, I have to say, it's been a real privilege to be part of the journey with each one of you from the beginning. So on behalf of NACD, let me say how much we appreciate having you as a long-standing contributing member of the organization. You know, NACD, it's been in the business for 40 years, is the premier organization for education and board excellence, and it serves as a mirror. What we do is we take a look at the 20,000 companies and board members, and it serves as a mirror of what's happening in board governance all over the country, and in fact, parts of the world. And so we capture that information, we identify the opportunities, we put together research products and state-of-the-art tools, and I just want to remind you that these are exclusive services that are provided to you. So we want to make sure that you take full advantage of some wonderful, wonderful information that NACD can provide. Take advantage of that. And so as Anne has stated, my purpose this morning is to give you a recap. We know we have some newly serving board members and want to make sure that everyone has a strong baseline from which we can continue. I also want to commend this board. I personally do a lot of these evaluations, and NACD does hundreds. And we go through the process, but then a lot of these organizations don't follow through. There is very little follow through. And this board is to be commended for its engagement and its follow through in making sure that the continuous improvement is happening. And again, in terms of board self-evaluation, it is a tool. It's just, that's what it is. It's a tool to say, where are we? Where do we want to be? What are we missing? And the thing that's important about it is it's about how members can collectively and individually develop enhancements to their own professionalism, to their own abilities to do the oversight and provide the guidance that is necessary, and how they can come together with one clear objective. And the clear objective is to make sure that you provide the guidance and oversight to sustain long-term value for your stakeholders. I mean, that's really the tie that binds, what the long-term value for stakeholders, for the workers, the public servants in California who so deserve to have these benefits. And so you're there to provide them with that long-term value, oversight, and comfort. And so the process is really about strengthening an already strong governance structure and ensuring that your board serves as a strategic asset. That's what it is. You are a strategic asset to this organization and a strategic asset to the members of CalPERS, and the stakeholders in CalPERS. And so this is a little bit of the chronology where we started, as I said, back in July 18th, 2018. We began the presentation. Following that, we worked very, very closely with Anne and her team, with management, making sure that we tailored the evaluation tool that was tailored to the uniquenesses and the characteristics of CalPERS. You have a very unique board, and very unique processes, and so we want to make sure that that was captured in the tool that we were going to be submitting. So we did that August, September, October, November. We tailored the surveys. They were distributed, and they were completed and submitted, and then using the information that you provided. I had the privilege of speaking with each and every one of you, and thank you for that 100% participation, both in completing the survey as well as in setting aside time to meet with me. And the feedback that was received on those one-on-one hour-long sessions was very insightful and very helpful to really focus on the recommendations that were going to be presented. So once the analysis was completed, we then presented the findings to the board back this January. And essentially, the process centered around the 5 core competencies that are the primary components that lead to exceptional governance core duties. Essentially, the board structure, how you're structured, the oversight that is provided, talent. This recent survey from NACD showed that one of the top 3 that keeps companies up at night, organizations up at night, is do we have the right talent? Do we have people with the right skill sets to help take us to the next level of the organization? So talent oversight and CEO succession is an important component. CEO succession has gotten shorter and shorter over the years. Used to be the majority of the CEOs would stay on, but now with mergers and all kinds of other disruptors in the market, we're finding that on average it's about 7 years. So CEO succession is a constant, ongoing review, and the skill sets you might need today might not be the same skill sets that you'll need down the road. So that's an important component of sound and leading governance. Of course, strategy and risk management oversight are also critically important and equally important. And so the way that the process was structured for each of these areas, the 5 areas that I mentioned, we had 2 scales. We had an effectiveness scale and we had an importance scale. And those, each board member ranked between 1 and 5. 1 being poor, 5 being excellent, 3 being good. We had good, great, excellent, 3, 4, 5. And so the effectiveness was really designed to measure how each board member evaluated the full board's performance for each one of these given statements. And then the importance scale was really, well, if this is so effective, how much time are we devoting to this particular component of our governance? And so the purpose here was to make sure that there was alignment between effectiveness and importance. The closer the alignment, the sounder your practices. Whenever there was a major variance, anything under 3, we found that to be a gap and an opportunity for continuous improvement. And so that's how the survey was structured, to make sure that we were able to identify these gaps and we were able to identify the leading strength that this board has. The same thing for the committee evaluations. We looked at your 6 committees and then we asked you to rate the effectiveness, again 1 to 5 for the effectiveness. And this is what we found. Leading strength, there was a remarkable degree of commitment and dedication to CalPERS mission. And the importance, you're very aware of the role, the important role that you play in the marketplace and in society. It was a shared commitment, 100% commitment, and deep care and attention and just the feeling for the importance of the role that CalPERS plays in your society, in this society. Similarly, strong support for transparency and accountability. You know, some of the hallmarks of leading practices and governance, transparency, making sure that everything is accessible and available, good communications, and being accountable for performance. And of course, diversity. This is one of the most diverse boards that I've ever seen, and we've seen a lot of them, but very proud of your diversity, and you should be. Also, very high marks between importance and effectiveness in the field of stakeholder engagement. Real commitment to making sure that the stakeholders really had access to the information, to the knowledge, to the strategy, to the things that make this organization be as effective as it is. And again, as it relates to board evaluations, reflecting the desire for continuous improvement as a board and also as individuals. In terms of identified opportunities, what we did was each area of the self-evaluation, we gave you a quantitative. So if it was, let's say the average was 3, maybe it was a 2.5, we saw a variance. So we gave you some quantitative feedback in some of the areas that we felt there was a gap, as well as in some of the areas that were great alignment between importance and effectiveness. We identified the steps that needed to happen to close some of these gaps, and of course share with you resources and some information about some of the leading practices that exist out there. So if we look at one of the components, the board structure, the qualitative summary, the board has been very effective in bringing the quality of governance forward through this self-evaluation process. But there were some opportunities that were identified, one of which really cut across committees, personal as a board member, as a committee member, and then as a board member. The roles and responsibilities could use some clarification. You know, what is expected of me, what is expected of me as a committee member, what's expected of me as a full board member. So there are differences, very nuanced, but very distinctive differences between one role and the other. And so there was the qualitative summary reflected that was important, that you needed to get some more clarification. Also the role of management vis-a-vis the role of the board. You know, what is management supposed to be doing? What is the board supposed to be doing? A strategic asset board is not one that drains the energy of management by requesting all kinds of data that aren't focused. A strategic asset board also isn't a board that just rubber stamps everything that comes through. A strategic asset board is one that adds value by providing the rigor of your analytic thinking, innovative thinking, being prepared, identifying the trends. Those are the kinds of things that are as important and distinguish the role of management in providing you the information versus sort of the scrutiny, the analytical broadening that is as a collective body that the board can provide to an organization. So that was very important. Also making sure that there was independence in terms of the committee chairs, the president of the board, the structures, a lot of questions about our structures, our charters, all of the policy, everything up to date. We also got quite a number, actually significant number of comments regarding compensation and desire to think about a more equitable structure for compensating. You know, the role of board members these days have grown exponentially. You have so many issues out there that back 20 years ago didn't even exist, with disruptive technologies, with cybersecurity, all of these things, with the changes in board leadership. boards becoming more professionalized, going deeper in certain areas. And so that requires you not just to rely on the information that management gives you, but also to do your own preparation and to look at the trends. What's happening out there in the public pension world, and how do we relate, and how do we compare, and what's happening? You know, what are the significant considerations that we need to bring to this body for deliberation? So those kinds of comments as it related to compensation were very present in the comments that we received. So in terms of the next steps in the area of roles and responsibilities, looking at leveraging a more robust and durable onboarding process, making sure that you stay current and well educated in what's happening in leading practices. Communications and access to management was important. How do you develop a common understanding of relationships between management and the board? Making sure that there's an open flow, but also one that is focused on the key priorities and the key strategies that you need to be addressing. Next steps, committee structures and charters, was to look at the composition of the investment committee. There was a lot of discussion in the evaluation about the investment committee. By definition, a committee is a subset of a full board. Typically, you have 3 to 4, maybe 5 tops, depending on the size of the board, but it's typically about a third of the full board. And these individuals are assigned based on the depth and expertise of the particular subject matter. So if it's finance, you may want to have more financial experts on that particular committee. And oftentimes it's also used for board development. You rotate to enhance the board knowledge. But it's unusual. In fact, I don't know, we've seen a committee described as a committee when it's in fact the full board. So that was something that came up in the discussions quite often. There was also a lot more interest in emphasizing risk and technology, you know, with everything that's happening. What exactly are we should be thinking? What should we know that we don't know? You know, it's one of the more common questions that are being asked on cybersecurity and technology. And again, compensation. If we looked at operational oversight, the qualitative summary, there were 3 key opportunities that were identified. One of the most important ones was the fiduciary duty, duty of care, duty of loyalty, the code of conduct culture, making sure that the code of conduct of the organization facilitates an open, candid discussion that engages in trust building, relationship building. Doesn't mean everybody has to have groupthink, but it does mean people should be able to express their views and their convictions in an environment that is safe and trusting and respectful. Also a lot of discussion about meeting materials, lots of comments about the thousands of pages that are provided, and whether there should be a way to really focus on what should the board be prioritizing, and the frequency of meetings. Certainly, on average, we're looking at 5 to 7 meetings a year for most boards, and so that was something that was brought to the attention of through the self-evaluation, that perhaps we should be visiting that. So in terms of what came out of the operational oversight, in terms of next steps, was ensuring that concerns over breaches of confidentiality were addressed, looking for more accountable mechanisms, and then having that freedom, that culture of transparency, accountability, and trust that really enables you to deliberate without holding back. Next steps, meeting materials. These were some of the steps that I know that Anne will be talking about in the work streams, refining the materials, ensuring that the information is accessible, and engaging with the board on ways to deliver the materials for enhanced preparation. What exactly do you need to be as effective as you can be in your role as a board member? And then the frequency of meetings, looking for ways to really reduce and perhaps supplement the personal meetings with some materials, some reports. A lot of companies, the organizations these days, are actually sending monthly updates on some of the key areas of discussion. You know, this is what's happened since the last time we got together. So that keeps the board members informed without having to have a lot of meetings. And using technology too really helps. And looking forward to Tim's comments on that. Again, meeting frequency. In the area of talent oversight and CEO succession, the qualitative summary was very positive. It really, all of the reporting board members believe that CalPERS does have a viable succession plan process in place. There was some concern about the ability to attract talent due to competition in the area of salary and location, logistics. And so that was kind of a concern. Also, would like to have more conversations around retention strategies, talent development, and professional development of talent to make sure that you have a pipeline of talent, that nothing leaves you in a lurch, if you will, should someone leave unexpectedly. So those were some of the discussions that board members felt needed to happen in the talent oversight. Next steps in the strategy oversight, looking at how can you more effectively communicate with management. So strategy oversight is one of your key responsibilities, and so how do you make sure that you have all the information you need, that management provides certain strategy recommendations, but at the end of the day, really the board is what's responsible for approving and setting the strategy, exploring options to the strategic plans being presented. So that level of discussion and communications was felt that was needed. Again, there was some concern around confidentiality breaches, which perhaps would have a chilling effect on the ability to discuss strategy more openly and freely. On the last component, risk management oversight, the board was quite satisfied, but also very cautious about the risks that might be out there. There were a lot of concerns, again, about technology, about cyber risks, volatility that's taking place in the marketplace, and disruptive technologies. Excuse me. Other kinds of considerations that came up had to do with the fee structure for consultants. Some members felt that perhaps you weren't making as fuller advantage of consulting services as perhaps one should, or that perhaps there's some overlap. So there's a lot of discussion around consultants and how to best negotiate and really streamline that process. And again, the issue of code of conduct came up. And so in summary, it was clearly the board was commended and continues to be commended on the progress that it had already made. The opportunities that were identified in this process were the code of conduct, clarifying roles and responsibilities at all levels of governance, looking at the committee structures and the composition, developing a compensation program that is equitable, looking at onboarding, a lot of desire to really more personal, professional, as well as board education in the onboarding program that was continuous, not just one and done, but ongoing. Professional development, looking at skill sets that are needed, and materials that need to be refined so that you can focus on the key priorities, as well as looking at the calendars and the agenda preparation, the format, and looking for reports as an update to the frequency in the meetings. So those were the general overviews and the general feedback. Again, I thought it was a very substantive input on the part of all the board members, and out of that, the recommendations for the work stream came about, and I have to commend the board again for really addressing this, which is a leading practice, but not a practice that is often done outside. So thank you for that, and with that, I'll turn it over to Ann. Should I ask for questions or later? Maybe later.
I think maybe later. Thank you. Thank you very much, Carrie. I think it's really helpful for all of us when we're looking at the work streams and their recommendations to understand, well, what is it that we were all trying to address? What was the point of all of this? So that's very helpful to go back and revisit. What we're going to do in the second part of the session is just walk through the recommendations that the board work streams are putting forward for discussion. As Marcy said, this is not for action today. It's really for a full and frank and open discussion, for raising questions, for us to come back and the work streams to refine and fine-tune their recommendations, also see if there's anything we've missed. An awful lot came out of the evaluation, and I think we got about 90% picked up in the recommendations, but if there's some important things that the work streams need to come back and look at again, this is an opportunity for that too. So, let me see. So, in all the work streams that were set up by President Jones, we put this lovely graphic together, really, and thank you to the public affairs team who did this. What we wanted to show in this graphic is that the work of the different boards' work streams is connected. In other words, we could just pick up one of these issues and do some good work, but really what we're trying to do in this project is look at the synergy between the different topics. So what we have are 4 work streams that you can see in blue, one on education, and that work stream has got some specific recommendations for you to discuss. The second work stream was on roles, roles and responsibilities. Again, we've got a set of recommendations from that group. Meetings and the associated materials, again, we have recommendations, and we also have on your desk a draft code of conduct. Now, what we've got with this bridge of mutually supporting work, it all sits on a platform called the Insight tool. And when I've shared with you the recommendations from the board work streams, I'm going to turn to Tim Taylor from our technology division. Tim's going to show you one example of how the Insight tool is going to improve your ability to get the information you need in a timely way. In other words, get information at your fingertips rather than just a data deluge every 30 days. So I do feel, looking at the work of all the board work streams, an enormous amount has been done. I think there's some very important recommendations for you to discuss. And really, this is in quite a short period of time because the evaluation findings only came through in January. So I think it's great credit to everybody on the board with everything else that you're responsible for to take the time to focus on this. So let's look at the first one. So this is our work stream on education. And the first recommendation is eminently sensible. Develop a richer and deeper onboarding program for board members, but also for the delegates. The delegates assume all the responsibilities of a board member when they sit in a meeting, so expanding the opportunity to include them more fully is going to be valuable. Secondly, we want to work on developing a formal education program for each of the 6 committees. Obviously, the board itself has the ultimate fiduciary duty to oversee management and to ensure that CalPERS' mission is fulfilled, but the real work is done through the 6 committees that the board has. So what this work stream is recommending is that for each of the committees, we identify the professional body which is responsible for that type of work. We form a partnership with them. And the purpose of that is it brings two things to the table. One, independence. The training is not being done by management, it's not being done by consultants or people with whom CalPERS does business. It's an independent professional body. And that objectivity and that expertise is going to be helpful, this work stream is recommending, for each of the committees. So we've actually made a start with the investment committee by setting up a partnership with the CFA Institute and the Council of Institutional Investors, and we've already had several sessions, and the response to that has been very positive. But we're learning as we go. For the Finance and Administration Committee, this is a different body of knowledge. It's a different specific function for the board. And so this work stream is recommending that we explore a partnership with the Institute of Actuaries, who played the same role, help identify the issues that that committee needs to address, and then build out the curriculum and the materials to help each member of that committee really feel they have the competence and confidence to take the decisions when they arise, and also to be very well informed in the oversight role that the committee has. Same here with the other committee, so board governance, naturally, it would be the National Association of Corporate Directors. You're our board governance partner. But also, in the past, we've had some very helpful work done for the CalPERS board by Rick Funston and his organisation. For pension and health benefits, we think it's the National Association of State Retirement Administrators. Also, we want to check in with the International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans because they have some excellent resources that could be useful. The Pacific Business Group on Health, Integrated Healthcare Association, and also Smart Care California. This committee actually covers an enormous range of work, so we may need more than one partner in building out the curriculum that committee members would benefit from. Likewise, risk and audit, different topic again. We think the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics will be a helpful partnership to explore, the Committee on Sponsoring Organizations, and as you would expect, the American Institute of CPAs, Certified Public Accountants. We do have more than one CPA on the board, actually, so we're very well served there. Finally, performance compensation and talent management. Obviously, that's a very important role for CalPERS. Talent management and incentives to align with CalPERS' mission. So we think the American Compensation Association could be a partnership that helps us there. So what I'm planning, President Jones, is just to run through all the recommendations, let Tim show us the example, and then open it up for discussion. So I hope you'll bear with me just while we move to the next work stream. So role and responsibilities, as Carrie said, I think there was just a sense of some confusion about, well, what does the board do? What do the committees do? What's the role of management? Where do the consultants fit in? And I think when looking through all the materials which set out the roles and responsibilities, some of them are quite old and very, very lengthy. And one of the recommendations at the last board meeting when we checked in with you on a progress report was a recommendation that we come out of the 19th century, which is when Robert's Rules of Order were developed, based on 16th century British parliamentary guidance. So it's good to have tradition with you, but time to freshen things up a little bit. And there was a very nice suggestion that we look at Rosenberg's Rules of Order because they've been designed for public bodies like the Board of CalPERS. So the recommendation here is for Matt Jacobs and his team to go through these with a fine-tooth comb, make sure that nothing is lost. If this is the new rules of order that are adopted by this board in due course, and if that's the case, then it might be time to kiss goodbye to, you know, the military gentleman, Mr. Roberts, who designed what we call the Old Testament. It's it's all good stuff, but it's, you know, quite hard to find your way around. So we think that in itself is actually going to help bring some clarity about who's meant to be doing what. Because I think, as Ben Meng said in his presentation and his lovely image of the boat, we're all in the same boat, but we have different roles to play, and we all need to pull together. So having some clarity about who's doing what is going to help everybody. There was a lot of discussion about the question of remuneration, but this work stream has decided not to make a recommendation on this topic, partly because how the remunerated time is worked out is partly a responsibility for bodies that are not under the control of this board. So it would mean some discussions with the legislature, for example, and it was just felt, wow, we've really got a lot coming out of all of these work streams. Let's work on the areas where the CalPERS board has the authority to make decisions, make that progress, and there may be a time to come back to it, but the work stream just feels it's not something for now. The other recommendation that this work stream is making is really to bring some clarity on agenda items, to develop, you remember when we were talking about deliverables last month, to bring a new template forward, which would give you a quick summary of something, tell you whether this is for information, is it for action, is it for education, and give you a snappy, short summary of the options that were explored. And once you've got your wonderful new insight tool at your fingertips, you'll be able to look back at all the relevant materials and past decisions, and we think that's really going to help on the question about role and responsibilities. Now, the big recommendation from this work stream: put all of the policies and all of the documents into plain English. And I have to say, I think all of us speak English either as our first or second or third language. But if you pick up some of the board delegations, oh my goodness, it's difficult to work out quite what it all means. And I have sat with these things. They're all sitting on that file at the moment on that desk. The first thing that happens is at the full page of government code citations. It's like, oh my goodness, where is this all going? So we think if we can translate without losing any of the content, if we can translate into plain English, it's going to help all of us understand the role and the responsibilities for each of the parties, the boards, the committees, the CEO, management, and consultants. Okay, so work stream 3, and you can see how all of this hangs together in our four-part bridge. Although I have to say, Frank said to me, this looks like a hamburger. You've ruined that for me for all time. Every time I look at it now, I say, yeah, it does look like a hamburger, but anyway, our bridge with the 4 work streams. So what this work stream was really looking at is, what's the role of the board, what's the role of the committees? And if you have real-time access to the information you need for oversight, when should the board meet? And I think also the backdrop to the discussion was thinking about what's leading practice in the governance community. As Carrie said, boards typically meet between 5 and 7 times a year. So these are the recommendations from the work stream for the board to consider. The first is that instead of 2, there's 1 annual strategy offsite, which would make sense because there's a 5-year strategic plan, and to have an annual check-in on the strategic plan could be useful. At the moment, that happens every 6 months, so that's their first recommendation. The second recommendation is that a new annual meeting be organised, and it to be for the benefit of stakeholders. And we think of a name along these lines, of an annual stakeholder forum. And the idea of this is it gives the stakeholder community a chance to come and talk to the board, talk to management. So it's for us as board and management to listen, but it also gives us an opportunity to communicate to stakeholders on issues that they care about. The example of climate change is one that came up in the discussions. And CalPERS has a very strong and very effective strategy on climate change, but we don't have the opportunity really to sit with stakeholders who care about this issue and talk to them about what we're doing and share the results. There are many other examples as well. The next recommendation is to reduce the number of board and investment committee meetings. And there's two reasons for that. The Workstream members are thinking about what is the role of the board, which is oversight and holding management accountable. And is that something you should be doing, as I said last time, on a lunar cycle? Every time the moon rises, it's a 30-day cycle. Is that the right interval? But then there's another question, which I think has come out in Ben Meng's comments to the board, which is if the management are focused on a 30-day cycle of reporting, it's a very short-term focus, and also it does mean, I think we gave you this number last time, in the last 2 years there have been 511 separate items of information produced for the investment committee. So the question for the board is, does that help you with your oversight, or would it be better to be using the Insight tool to get timely information? And what's the best interval for making decisions? So at the moment, 5 of the 6 committees meet on, I'm thinking quarterly, and then extra meetings as needed. For example, when health rates are being set, it's important. So the recommendation here is to fix on a number of board meetings, for example, quarterly, and have a cycle of committee meetings for ordinary committee meetings that would be quarterly, and then to add extra meetings as they may be needed. For example, if there's a need for a hearing, the board may need to meet for the hearing, or a committee when it's going through some very complicated and short-term decisions like health rates that require it to come back at short intervals. So that's a proposal for discussion with the board about what's the most effective and efficient way to use both management time and the board's time. The final area of discussion for this work stream is about looking at the structure for the committees. Now, 5 of the 6 committees are committees, as Carrie said. It's a subdivision of the board. And the reason for that, the reason for having a committee structure, is that it allows not the whole board, which is quite big with 13 people, a smaller group can give focus, they can do deep dives, and also you get a kind of checks and balances process. So a committee can do a deep dive, then they report up to the board, and the board in its whole membership gets an opportunity to debate the recommendations from the committee. So effectively you get 2 bites of the cherry on big topics. If the committee is the board, you lose some of that. You lose some of that ability to have the deep dive with a smaller group. The other thing is that there are some board members who would have expressed that they would like to focus their attention on one or other committee areas, whereas right now board members don't have a choice about whether to serve on the investment committee because it's a committee of the whole. As I've said to some of you, it's our jumbo shrimp. It's a committee, but everybody's on it. So this work stream would like to recommend that a consistent structure be established for all the board committees, to give board members choice about where they serve on a committee, because it does require education and training and time to build out the expertise. And that would also mean all board members play that role of receiving recommendations from committees and deciding and making the final decision on whether to adopt those committees' recommendations. The next work stream, number 4, has been putting together a draft code of conduct. There are many places in CalPERS policies and documents where issues of the board's conduct are touched on and referenced, but they're not all drawn together in one place. And some of the issues which a modern board faces, like confidentiality or use of social media or interacting with public bodies, some of these were not envisaged or thought through when some of the earlier policies were put into place. So what you have on your desk is a first draft of a code of conduct, which this work stream is putting forwards. Their recommendation is that you accept this as a first reading. We'll have a discussion shortly of this proposed code. They're recommending that following the first reading today, that CalPERS Fiduciary Council be asked to review the first draft to make sure that the content is nicely lined up with fiduciary duty, which is set out in law for CalPERS under the Constitution. And then, if the board agrees, to bring this code of conduct back next month in August for the second reading, and if the board agrees, to consider adopting at that stage with any of the further revisions and input that the work stream gets today. So those are the 4 work streams with the board members. I apologize. There's one other point this work stream is including in the draft to draw to your attention. The question with a code of conduct is, how's it going to have an impact? And what happens if there is a breach or a seeming breach of what the code of conduct is asking for? Because the code of conduct is setting expectations for behavior. So there is, within the draft code, a proposal that once a year there's an annual attestation, which is a fancy word for saying, I do. It gives each board member an opportunity to say, I've read this, I've thought about it, and I'm fully committed to all the provisions of the code. And the board president would preside over that process. There's also a proposal that if the code is breached or there's an appearance of a breach, that the board governance committee would have the responsibility for ensuring that there's a fair hearing on all sides and steps are taken. Right, so as advertised, all of these 4 work streams, education, all the materials for roles and responsibilities in the policies, the meeting agendas, the code of conduct, this is a lot of material. And as you know, internally, the technology team has been building out a new tool, which has got the name Insight, which tells you precisely what it's intended to do for you. The idea is that this will give the board a dashboard. It's not that you're flying a plane, but really what you need in exercising, excuse me, your oversight function is, the question is, what should you be looking for? What are the vital signs? What are the, if you like, the key performance indicators that are going to allow you to track whether management is fulfilling the strategy that you've approved? So what's happening now with the, is I'm going to hand over to Tim to give you an example of how this could work. And we thought the example that might be useful is the performance of the fund. Because what happens now is, in the midst of the 1,000 pages of material that you get, there'll be some rather important numbers. And you don't get them for a few weeks. You'll get them at the board meeting, the investment committee, when it gets together. But what this Insight tool will allow is for that data, that performance data, to be given to you the day that it's ready. So when Ben and his team in the investment office have pulled all those numbers together, it's probably one of the numbers you're really interested in, and our stakeholders are really interested in, because it affects so much. You'll be able to get it on the day that it's produced. It'll be loaded up into the Insight tool, which means board members will be able to see that number, And the beauty of having the history of all that data is you'll be able to look at trends over time, and you'll be able to look at performance relative to the benchmark that the board has approved. So in other words, you're not just getting a data dump. I think, Ben, that's your phrase, a data dump. It's like a skip load of data just showers you with thousands of pieces of information. This will actually give you information you really need to exercise your fiduciary responsibility as a board, and it's going to be given to you in a timely way, the minute it's available. The other thing about the Insight tool is that this is going to allow us to give information in a more timely way for stakeholders. Obviously, the board will have access to confidential information, which is market sensitive or personnel related or litigation related, but in that commitment to transparency and accountability, as Carrie mentioned, this is CalPERS. CalPERS fully committed to that. This Insight tool is going to enable stakeholders through the website to be able to get that information in a more timely and useful way also. So Tim, are you ready? Are you ready? It's your moment now. We've, as we say in London, we've bigged you up, mate. Let me hand you over to Tim to talk to you about how this will work, and just give you this one example of what we think is going to give you better, more timely access to information that you really need. So, Mr. Big, over to Tim.
We're having some IT issues, ironically. This is not Insight that's causing this problem. I don't know what you would all like me to do at this point.
Would you like to come back after we've had some discussion? We can
That
have
would be fantastic.
our board president. Shall we open for
Yeah, why
discussion,
don't we,
and we can have
yeah.
the show and tell
Right.
afterwards? I hope
Right,
I've
why don't we,
described it fairly.
board members can ask any question they want, but in terms of trying to organize the process, why don't we go recommendation by recommendation to see what questions board members have on each of the recommendations, and then starting with the first stream, and then we move to the second stream, and that way we'll, of course you could ask any question you want, but at least that's an orderly process. So we'll start with the Workstream recommendations for number one and see if there are any questions or have
Thank you.
dialogue around that. So Betty?
I appreciate the focus on developing a curriculum. I guess my question is really the partnerships we would form with these different organizations and associations. Is that for the purpose of seeking expertise or actual coursework? And my concern here is just to be sure that the curriculum is tailored to the needs of this board. And oftentimes when we've gone to conferences of these organizations, it's kind of been hit or miss. And so is there going to be further input in terms of the curriculum needs, or is this kind of a tailor-made curriculum?
Thank you for the question. It's an important point. We started with the investment committee and looked at what was available. And what we found is there was nothing that really suited our needs. So what we're doing with the CFA and CII is tailoring what they do in a one-day program and turning it into a new curriculum. And we looked at the responsibilities of the investment committee, the delegation which the board has given, to say, well, what does the investment committee have to do? And what do you need to know if you're on the investment committee? What do you, as a committee member, need to understand in order to fulfill those functions? So we're really designing it for the CalPERS board members' responsibility. So that's meant a more time-consuming process, but what we hope out of this is we're getting a much more high-quality product. And we're finding quite a lot of other pension funds are contacting us because they're interested in this as well, because if CalPERS doesn't have it, you can be pretty sure that other funds don't have it either. So we're going to, I think the idea is, excuse me, and this work stream Ms. Taylor, Ms. Pasqua-Rogers should weigh in here because this is their work stream. But the idea is that we would take our time to really build high-quality curriculum, reading materials, and then all of that can live on the Insight tool. So at any point where you need a refresher on something or a new board member comes in, you've actually got that at your fingertips. You'll be able to revisit the presentation, look at the materials, and also things like glossaries and explanations in plain English will all be there for you. Would the Workstream members like to add anything to that?
And Anne, maybe where this question came from is that I think, one, not to overlook the expertise and resources we have in-house, which I think is a starting point. And this tees off really in terms of how robust our onboarding process is. And I would hope that these other tools and resources would be to build upon, obviously, what we already have in-house. It just makes it, kind of more grounded in terms of what we're responsible for.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. Just to, again, we're learning as we go, but what we've done with the CFA, for example, the session that we had on fixed income, we worked with CFA to take their basic material and worked with our global fixed income team, with Ben, with Arnie Phillips, and others, so that what you had in that session directly related to CalPERS. It wasn't an all-purpose session that you could have picked up at a conference. It was all specifically designed to cover the CalPERS asset class. So it will take us longer to build it out like that, but I think it will give us a much better product, as you say, drawing on the expertise we have in-house, but also having the high standards and independence that we get from a professional body.
Okay, Teresa.
So, yeah, thank you, Anne. Thank you, Carrie. We, Mona and I have worked on this, and I think one of the things we were conscious of is this, this thought that if we're doing it in-house too much, then we're not being independent enough. So that was part of the reason why we wanted to reach into these professional organizations, but I think we're also happy to take, and I may be speaking out of turn, Mona, but take recommendations from the board. For example, I think it's tough to make decisions on who exactly we would want to come with healthcare, because there are so many great research organizations and institutions that can help us through, we heard several of them yesterday, that can help us through how we, rate in rates and how we take on pharmaceuticals. We have a list of ones that we came up with, but that's not a finalized list. And then, of course, if we have expertise in-house, I would hope we would, work together with that outside organization. And then finally, I think it's important that we make sure that we are, before we present it, that we're looking at it, the work stream is either looking at it or the work group, not the work stream, the work group's looking at it so that we can say, okay, this is too simple or this is too high level, let's tailor it a little better, so that we're not putting on a course that isn't relevant to us. So I just wanted to make that clear, and I don't know, Mona, if you want to add to that.
Mona?
Yep, thank you. I think this was what we were trying to do is really hit all levels. So yes, it is about independence, but it's also about once we get these great, the staff does this amazing job of onboarding. Quite honestly, I might be the only one here that needs it, but we got to do extra reading to really understand it and think again and process the enormity of our jobs. And so I think this was really something to really give extra tools, additional tools that I think everyone can benefit, no matter how long you've been on the board, because refreshers are always good. I think we're open to, if there are other people or who could help us with this in terms of organizations, this is the time to talk about it. I think it's really important and should be required because a lot of this education is really, really important to the work that we do. Thank you.
So any other questions on Workstream 1? David?
Not so much a question, just a comment. I think it's really important to note that the recommendation is recommending onboarding program for board members and their delegates. And I really feel it's important that we include the delegates in these opportunities. It just totally makes sense to me. And not that we've had, guards at the door to keep delegates out of things, but I think it needs to just be part of the planning, part of the process, and I include them 100% all the way along.
Okay. Okay, so, yeah, Jason?
I like a lot what Mona said regarding making it required reading. So if there's a way to track and insight, just kind of sort of like, man, that was bad, kind of sort of. Much like the way we use sexual harassment or the other kind of training that we have to take, make it required. And Margaret and I recently attended the School of Wharton basic, I don't remember that class, professional. And it was, I learned a ton, and it wasn't as intense as Ramon's class that he went to with homework. It was more for our level of oversight. And I mean, I would recommend everyone go to that.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, Margaret?
I'll take exception to what my colleague Mr. Perez said about having it track who's reading and who's not. Diligent doesn't do that for one specific reason, and that is fiduciary liability. You don't want to track and find out that the board members hadn't read the materials and therefore have a lot of liabilities. You may want to check with Diligent why they don't do that on purpose. I'm just saying we should all be responsible adults and read the information. I read everything that's given to me in appropriate time. But if given enough time, I read all the information and am prepared for the meeting. But you really don't want it to track, and you may want to check with that. And Mr. Jacobs, if you check with Diligent, you'll find out why, just in terms of liability. Thank you.
Yeah, and your comment is well taken, and that's why during the presentation we indicated that our fiduciary council will review this information to be sure that we are not violating. Yeah. Okay, any other questions on this one? Okay, so we move to 2, Workstream 2. Questions, comments? Betty?
Just a comment, I'm going to sound like a broken record here. I think there's an omission here with respect to the role and responsibility of consultants. And especially if we are moving to really focus the board to have more of primarily more of an oversight focus. It's one of the tools that I believe the board and the committees need. And as I'm going through all of the work streams, I'm trying to think about how to incorporate their input. And I know we've had a lot of discussion about, expectations of our consultants, how much we're paying them. But frankly, we're never going to get around that if we don't just allow the consultants to serve us. There are consultants. And I'm foreseeing that given the streamlining that's going to be done relative to how information will be coming to us, I really would like to see a parallel track and insight that would be devoted to the consultants' input as well.
Okay, well taken. Okay, any other comments on Workstream 2? Okay, let's then move to Workstream 3. Questions, comments? Margaret?
I'd like to say that I think an annual strategy offsite is just having one is a great idea. I'd like it to be somewhere where probably closer to an airport, so where we don't have to drive in several hours of traffic on the 101. And that's not only for us, but that's for our stakeholders who travel. So, I mean, it doesn't matter where it is, it just should just be near an airport, and it should be fairly inexpensive. I really have concerns about an annual stakeholder forum. If that is a way of getting rid of monthly stakeholder meetings, I think that's a problem. And would we do that at no cost for our members, for the stakeholders? I don't know. So we need to be careful about that. I think I don't care about if you reduce the number of board and investment committee meetings. I just want to make sure that we have the opportunity to provide oversight and that we get all the information. I also don't want staff to be saying we need to delegate even more to them because we're only meeting 6 times a year. That would be the wrong incentive to do this. And I'm not sure where's the one where we downsized the size of the investment committee? Where's that? Is that this one? Is that Workstream 3?
Yeah.
Or is that Workstream 4? I'll wait to that.
No, it's
Oh,
here.
it's this one?
It's establish. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, because it's consistent structure for all board committees. So, you know, if you go way back, CalPERS used to have an investment committee with only 6 members on it. And they would duke it out, and then it would come to the full board like things do now, right? When you have a subcommittee and it goes to the full committee, and then you would duke it out all over again. Or what would happen is the investment committee would make a decision, and then there'd be some lobbying, and then when it came time to the full board, that decision would be reversed. And so I really want to be very careful about how we look at that. And we should go back and look at that or talk to some people who served on the board when the investment committee was a subcommittee and take a look at that, because that can be very problematic. Thank you.
Anne?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify my understanding from this work stream, is that the stakeholder forum would be in addition to. It would not be to. It's a plus. It's like give something more to the stakeholders than the 3 minutes that they have to speak to the board at the end of a session.
Well, and hopefully that would be at no cost or very low cost. If it ends up being something like we do for the education forum, that becomes very costly. Remember, usually a lot of the stakeholder groups are retired and have limited funds. Thank you.
Okay, Lisa?
The concept behind the stakeholder forum, as Ann said, is in addition to. Further, the concept was that this would be a more interactive event than we traditionally are able to have in our regular board meetings, where public comment is coming up at the end of a discussion of items. Instead, what we would have is a forum that is concentrated on receiving input from various stakeholders. And clearly one of the concepts is that we do this in areas where it is very accessible to our stakeholders. There's clearly Sacramento has far more stakeholders than any other region of our state, but there are many regions in the state with significant numbers. So we would want to move those meetings around over the course of a number of years so that people from throughout California who have an interest would have an opportunity to easily come.
Okay. David?
Yeah,
Okay. I'm calling on the members who are on that committee first, and then I'll get to the other side.
And just to build on what Ms. Middleton said, you know, ultimately there'll be a lot of details to work out, and in August we may have some decisions to make, which will still then be a lot of follow-up work and detail. But envisioning something where we can have more interaction, more actual dialogue, and not just us talking to them and getting their feedback, but having real dialogue and opportunities for the stakeholders to engage with each other and for us not to just do the standard, someone comes up to the mic, talks at people, and then people get the mic for a few minutes and talk back at them, and we record it and we move on, but actually be able to design some processes and some dialogue to actually really learn and share and come to some common understandings, if nothing else, and not just have it be a one-way or a limited two-way conversation.
Okay. Mona?
I could do
Oh, you
one.
want to follow up?
With regard to the reducing the number of people who are serving on the investment committee back to the 9 that we have on all of the other committees, as is common practice now, anyone may attend any of the committee meetings. They don't vote, but they can attend. They can participate, and we are proposing that a reconfigured investment committee would follow exactly that same practice. Everyone would have an opportunity to attend. Everyone who is on the board would have an opportunity to offer comments and questions during the course of the investment committee meetings.
Okay. Mona?
Thank you for the work on this. I really appreciate the stakeholder forum, especially knowing that the possibility of rotating up and down the state to be accessible to the people that we serve is really important. We see our retirees come at the same ones every meeting, but think about those who would love to come if given the opportunity, and I really think it's great for us to be able to go to them. With regard to reducing the number of board meetings, my own personal observation in the last 6 months is that I think this would be wonderful because of the fact that we have these great meetings and we ask the staff to do all of these things, and the minute these meetings end, they are on the clock to answer all of our questions, plus the work that they're supposed to do, plus da-da-da-da-da-da. And I think that it's smart for us because whenever there is a victory or there is a failure, we all wear it. So in order to be much more effective, but to give them the opportunity to all of us to do our jobs, I think that would be important. And that's not to say that we're not going to be in contact. That people might be off doing their own thing. This is about how can we be much more efficient with our time and theirs. And so I really appreciate the work and the recommendation.
Good. Betty?
I think I want to just be clear about who we mean by stakeholders. Are they our members and beneficiaries and related organizations, or are they other interest groups more broadly? I just want there to just be some thought about that, because how we structure this forum will matter in terms of what we're trying to achieve. Reducing the number of meetings, I understand the purpose of it, and that's fine. I guess my question is, what if actions are required in between meetings? I just want to be very clear about what that process is, and I will say that I'm not necessarily comfortable with a delegation to a chair or vice chair to make a decision on behalf of the committee, so I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know what those issues might be. It could be taking a position on a bill, whatever it is, but we should just kind of think about that in advance. I guess the whole thing that I'm kind of sitting here kind of quietly contemplating, the focus on oversight of the board, I get. I guess I'm having a hard time trying to think about how do we characterize the work that we do with respect to asset allocation and the LM process. I mean, is that oversight, or is it?
No, that's a very good question. And one reason, thank you, because this is your work stream, and President Jones too. One reason for putting the delegations into plain English is I think it will help clarify that the board's got 3 roles. One is oversight, but it's oversight of decisions that you've made. So the board has the responsibility to approve the asset allocation and then to have oversight of how that asset allocation is being executed by management. And the method for doing that will be, we hope, through the real-time information you'll get through Insight, where you'll have the performance data, the asset ranges, at your fingertips rather than waiting for a paper report or a diligent book report once a month. So we want to improve your oversight by getting you better, timely information. So you have an oversight role of decisions you've made, asset allocation being a good example, and then the other responsibility you have as a board in those delegations is to conduct. You conduct your own evaluation and you conduct hearings. But I think once all those very complicated documents are translated into plain English, it's going to be a lot easier for people to track what are the responsibilities of the board, of the committees, and then what's the information flow you need to enable you to carry out those duties.
No, I appreciate that. I'm a little concerned about the transition to what we're about to embark upon with these recommendations. Not to say I'm opposed to the recommendation, but I think given the way the board has conducted itself in the committees to date and what we're transitioning towards, I think the perception will be that we are not providing enough transparency or conducting as much business as the public has been used to. So I would just caution that in an effort to achieve efficiency that we are not really, hopefully, minimizing the amount of public transparency.
Teresa? Oh,
Good.
No, I just signed up.
no, he's not.
Do you want to talk?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
In regards to the meeting frequency, yeah, I think we need to do everything we can to get out of the way of the team so they can meet that goal. I do, like Betty said, I do have concerns regarding to the relevant materials and the updates that we'll be receiving. And in regards to the investment committee, I think my heartburn with that would be if I'm just an observer and not an active participant or a member of the investment committee, I can't motion or second. So that's kind of a big deal to me. As far as stakeholder engagement, the separate offsite that we're going to have, I think that's a good idea. But I didn't hear anybody mention employers. I know we have an employer forum, but I think I'm assuming that they're already included. Okay. And let's see. Lastly is I would like to incorporate some kind of board fellowship into these meetings.
What does that mean?
Like a buddy system, or what are you referring to?
Like
No.
What we used to do.
Well, we do have
Team building.
like we have.
team building.
I see. Just like, for example, we do have a voluntary board dinner
Right, yeah.
On Mondays that after investment committee. Is that what you're talking about, or are you going beyond
If we can
that?
put something on calendar where board members are expected to attend, I think that would be.
But then you got to come in a day early, and I mean you could do that, but just know that you're.
Think how much more efficiently we would
Yeah.
work if we could all understand where each other a little bit better.
Okay. Matt.
I would just point out that any meetings like that would have to be social only, and you could not discuss CalPERS business or business that's under the within the what's the word I'm looking for, within the the stuff that
ceremonial
that CalPERS deals with.
I just want guys and girls to be able to hang out and BS and get to know each other on a personal level, so we can
Like the board dinners.
just get.
Yeah.
Which
like
is
the
fine.
board
I just
dinners.
want to, it's just a caution to be careful. You'd have to be careful about that.
Okay, Rob.
Yeah, Henry, I think what he's referring to is like last night, everybody was on their own, but in the past, on the Tuesday nights, we've gone bowling as a group, we played bocce ball. Just something to do, social and ceremonial, no business, but an opportunity for people to get together outside of this environment.
Okay. Okay. Teresa?
Yeah. So, well, did Lisa want to talk since it's her work stream? Okay. So I just want to thank you guys. I like these ideas. Annual strategy offsite. So instead of 2, 1's a great idea. I think incorporating what Jason was talking about the team building exercises, I think we could do something at the board meetings if we're lessening the amount of board meetings on the Monday of or the Tuesday of the board meetings, unless we're moving the days. But I think it's a good idea. I mean, we try to do the dinner but I think something more fun than just having dinner might be, like Rob said. So the annual stakeholder forum, I think what my question is on that is, so we are continuing, obviously, our monthly stakeholder Thursday meeting for a couple of hours that we have. But the monthly stakeholder forum, and you can answer that when I'm done. What is our goal for the monthly stakeholder forum? What are we trying to accomplish with that?
The annual.
I'm sorry, the annual. I'm sorry. And then I think it's important that we, as Jason said, get out of the way of the staff and have less meetings so that they're not at the end of the meeting monthly, then they're starting their prep for the next month's meeting. I think that becomes just a little bit too hard. And I think when we come to important decisions like the ALM, that we can either, because that's what, biannually or whatever, we can call more meetings if we need to. Obviously, healthcare, we're going to have to meet more often because we talk about the rates in April, May, and June. I don't know if that can be resolved by, sending stuff out to the board, but that's all closed session information. Oops, sorry. And then I think that was it. I think it's important that we do take it down from the committee of the whole for the investment committee. CalSTRS doesn't have monthly meetings. I think they have 6 meetings a year or 8 meetings a year. It's not. And with our offsite, that would be.
But they're really packed meetings. I mean, we go long days.
Yeah. And we did before, and I remember when we first took October off, it does become a really busy schedule. So I guess, like Betty said, you need to bear in mind that if we do this, our meetings will be very busy, and we will probably go. We have had meetings where we have gone till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So just be prepared for that stuff. But again, thank you guys for the work.
Lisa, did you finished?
Certainly, one of the goals for the annual stakeholder meeting has already been identified, to make it easier for individuals around the state to be able to participate in our meetings. I think there's real value in us going to those communities, and I can say as a local government representative, I very much appreciate Mr. Perez's statement, because we want to be able to hear from the employers. The cost implications for local government are extreme, and those are messages that we need to hear, as well as hearing from the stakeholders. But I think one of the primary goals for that is to make sure that there is an opportunity for individuals to interact with us. And I will go back to, we have in our city now annually a meeting where we can only bring 2 members of city council, but we open the doors to anyone come and speak for as long as they want to speak. And the 2 members who are there respond to those questions, and they are very fulfilling interactions that we have, and we observe the Brown Act that applies for local municipalities. I see this as an opportunity for us to have back and forth conversation with our stakeholders.
Okay, good. Margaret, and then David.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to support another comment of Mr. Perez's, which is I wasn't even thinking that if you're not on the investment committee, you wouldn't be able to make a motion or a second to either approve or disapprove an item. And I can tell, and I don't know how that would work in closed session because a lot of those votes happen in closed session. So you'd go from closed session in the investment committee to closed session in the Board of Administration for the full vote to approve it. It's a little dicey there. And I will tell you, in a closed session perf and comp, I wasn't allowed to make a motion or second a motion. And you know, it's very troubling when you are not on the committee and you can't act. And I think the investment committee is one of the most important things we do, and I don't think we should reduce the size or the number. I think if we reduce the number of times we meet and we become very focused, I think that's critical. But I really don't think removing people from the committee is the answer here.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I hadn't thought about a closed session vote with a smaller committee, and then when you get to the full board, you have to go back into closed session to deal with that. So that's a major consideration. Yeah, David?
Yeah, just a couple kind of big thoughts and then kind of honing in a little. I think everything that in this work stream we tried to focus on was how are we going to be more effective and if not more efficient, not less efficient, and how are we going to really add value as much as possible with the work we do as a board in our roles vis-a-vis the work management and staff have to do in their roles. And so things like some concordance of the calendars, we didn't just look at calendars, we looked at what is the actual work that the board does, and how does it cycle through on an annual or multi-year basis and come to us for information, for decisions, for discussion, for oversight, and what's the work that management and the CalPERS teams have to do, and how do we maximize integrating those things into our calendar. We weren't really starting off saying how many meetings do we want to have. We were saying how do we best look at where over the course of the year are we having to do certain things? Where does our strategic planning hit budget planning, hit operational planning? Where do we do these things? And does it make sense when we've got, for most committees, on a quarterly basis, having them on different months and being back all the time with this kind of churn that's calendar driven, not task and activity and needs. And we quickly realized that, yeah, and we always have the ability to have, with proper public notice and everything, additional meetings if we need to. We are somewhat challenged by some of the external constraints or requirements or limitations in terms of having real subcommittees the way a lot of boards do. But that's what really drove us, and that the calendar was kind of the cart, not the horse pulling it along. The calendar was not pushing the discussion. It was, you know, where we reflected what our thoughts were and recommendations, and just in terms of the annual forums too. I've been involved in a lot of stuff where we've had multiple stakeholders with very different perspectives, and we've had in organizations I've been with, we've had good opportunities to have dialogue just with them, but not amongst them. And this is the kind of thing where rather than just hearing each other at the mic for 3 minutes at a time, they'll actually, I would hope we would design these forums in a way that they would actually have some real dialogue with each other as well, not just with us trying to, you know, have it be a two-way conversation one at a time from them to us. And then finally, just when it comes to having the structure of the committees and I just don't see much value, and I don't think the rest of the world does. I mean, I struggled and have challenged everyone to provide me examples where committees of the whole are making this kind of decision-making in this kind of setting, or even closely related settings. And what it says to me is, if we can't work and respect and trust each other to work on a subcommittee with people who want to be on that committee and want to focus their more or less specialized expertise and time and talent on that versus other committees, to bring back to the full board for decision on every single one of these aspects, and whether that recommendation has a closed session element or not, which in investment it certainly will, but the full board will get to hear it, to make motions, to oppose motions, to support motions, and to vote. And so it's really a matter of, do we, as guardians of the process, do we have faith in a democratic process and in subcommittees working and bringing things back to us? Because otherwise we need a committee of the whole for everything we do, which is just not reasonable. So that's my soapbox for the day.
Betty?
Thank you, David. And I do really want to applaud the work that my colleagues have done on this. It's all thoughtful, and I think certainly in trying to be respectful of people's other commitments in life and professionally. I really appreciate that. I have a couple comments. One is, with respect to this committee of the whole and the investment committee, I guess my question is, in terms of the committee composition, is that still going to be, Henry, Mr. President, your kind of role to assign members to committees? Okay. We're kind of moving in the opposite direction with respect to the investment committee, and I guess what I would say about that is, and I don't know what the motivation is for my colleagues who don't want to serve on investment committee, but it seems to me those who have an interest, who bring a perspective, who maybe have expertise and want to be on the committee should be on the committee, and that it's not just kind of an assignment. I want to be sensitive about this because it is an important committee. And if we were looking at committee of the whole and kind of the charge that we have, I would say probably pension and health ought to be a committee of the whole in terms of how we serve our members, but we're not going in that direction, and I obviously understand the reason why. But I just want maybe a way to kind of deal with some of this, because I think there's a feeling by some of you that you're not going to continue to be part of this robust process of the business of the investment committee. So I would just say to you, Henry, as we're thinking about the committee composition, that particularly for investment committee, that those who want to serve should be able to serve. And for whatever reason, my colleagues who don't, obviously they have that ability to step away. On the issue of the stakeholder forum, so we've done a lot with stakeholders, and so I think this is meant to be a more focused session with them. And I just wanted to applaud Marcy, because even with our educational forum, with respect to just continue establishing a separate track for our employers, our public agency employers, has been really valuable. And so there are a lot of tools where hopefully we can spread all those around the state, so there's much more access to having the direct interaction with us. But I also heard Ann talk about stakeholders from the perspective of those who maybe share in some of the larger overarching issues that we're dealing with, like climate. And I think that's a separate kind of stakeholder forum where it's more substantive. It talks about some of the things that we don't really cover in investment committee or some of our other committees, as far as some of the the global engagements that we're involved in, the partnerships that we're engaged in. But I think it could be helpful for us in terms of just illuminating what all we do that doesn't necessarily get to see the light of day during the regular course of our board meetings, and I think that could be kind of educational as well. So I hope that the focus is such that first and foremost that to our immediate stakeholders, certainly our public agency employers, our retirees, our members and beneficiaries, that they do have as full access to us as possible through these forums. But I would like to see, as to your point, David, about the 3-minute testimony, and then we don't really get to dive into any of these issues, that also be the forum for getting into a deeper conversation.
Okay, good. Yes, and Betty, yes, the investment committee, I generally get input from board members that their desires to be on various committees, and everyone wants to be on the investment committee. There are some who don't want to be on other committees, and they let me know, put me on that committee. But investment, everybody has expressed an interest to. Well, it was part of our work stream to look at roles and responsibilities and look at meetings and see if there's an interest to make changes. There's no decision made, but we want to get all the input so we can ultimately make a decision about where we go.
Okay, I didn't know whether,
Yeah,
I thought there was a lack of a desire on the part of some not to have it be a committee of the whole.
Yeah,
So,
okay. And then, there are, I mean, it came from the committee, but that's the committee's work, and now it's going to be a board decision. So, we're going through a process. The other thing I wanted to mention about the stakeholders forum, and to David's point, is that, we combined the forum with our educational forum the last 2 years, I think, where we were getting ready to deal with very large issues like the discount rate. We brought stakeholders in and on a separate track and talked about new viewpoints from a number of different viewpoints to do exactly what you said. It wasn't a 3-minute. People went around and had a dialogue about the impact of the discount rate on the public agencies. So that's another possibility, is to combine a broader stakeholder forum with the educational forum, because everybody will be there already. And so it perhaps may make sense to do that also. Okay. Yes, Mr. Bingus?
I just wanted to say that the feedback that came out of the self-evaluations had to do with the investment committee and whether it really should be allowing input at the full board level. But there was a lot of comments about the investment committee has sort of become, even within the full set of board members, a subset, because there's a lot of participation among certain and not as much from others. So there was a whole lot of comments about should this be revisited to see if, if you're looking at the board members that have the depth and the expertise and the focus, and then allow that committee to provide feedback to the full board for further participation. But that was a feedback that we received from the self-evaluation.
And then also we have another stream about education. So we want to educate all board members so that they can be active participants in the process. So Jason, you had Margaret, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Again, in looking at the investment committee and potentially downsizing it, even if you think about the economics of staff time, I couldn't imagine having the discussion in with the smaller investment committee, and then coming back to the Board of Administration and dragging staff back and go back through pillars 3 and 4 all over again. I mean, we'd be doing that twice. Once in the closed session for just the board, because again, if you're not on it, you don't get to motion, you don't get to make a second. And then you go back to the Board of Administration and you would hash that all out again, and you'd have to bring the staff back again. And I don't see the economics of it in terms of time and energy. And then again, if the board is making one decision, there would be the opportunity to be lobbied up until 2 days later when the full board takes it up. I really see it as problematic. Thank you.
Jason?
Yeah, I just don't quite understand if everyone wants to be on it, and to everyone else's points around the table, why did this particular issue come up? What's the benefit of shrinking it?
Dave?
No, I understand that it came up, but I want to hear from the people that brought it up.
We do have some changes on the board. I'm sorry.
David?
Yeah, I think it's just, when you look around and say, what is the value of a committee of the whole? in terms of addressing things, and why do you have committees, and what makes the most sense when we're dealing with very complex issues. We're dealing with issues like, for example, the pillars came up. Part of the challenge there was that we were meeting so often that there wasn't time for staff to get as much done in between. The care and feeding of an entire board and a committee of the whole in that setting makes it really challenging. And the reason I view when you have a committee is because you say this is something that we're not going to try to do as an entire board. We're going to entrust the people on this committee to take that first cut, to do that deep dive, to not be as diffuse in their focus, but to really do that work, bring it back to the board, and then if there are still issues that, you know, other people on the board who weren't on that committee want to get into, we can get into them. I mean, that's the whole idea of committee structures. And it just doesn't make sense to me to have a committee of the whole for one thing. If we don't trust that kind of process, then it seems that we would be a committee of the whole for everything we do. And as Betty said, pension and health. Why is that less important or less complex or different somehow that wouldn't be a committee of the whole? Or risk and audit or whatever. And so it's a way of kind of bringing things down, and you're taking tasks and you're putting focus of less than the full group on different things to bring back to be able to do a better job at getting things done, rather than having everybody involved at every step of vetting everything for every decision we make as a board. That's the whole concept of committee structures, and it just seems that investment should not be that different from anything else in terms of, and I'm not gonna, you know, call for specific people to express their interest at this moment, but I know there are folks that are not as interested or engaged in investment committee and the workload that requires to do the deep dives, but who still certainly want to serve in their role and have their opportunity to be part of the decision making when things come back to the full board.
The investment committee is our bread and butter. I mean, that's the biggest, those decisions are the biggest decisions that we can make as a board, in my view. And as a fellow Steeler fan, you know I respect you. But I don't, if we're weighing the risk, weighing the two issues, I think the ability to have input from everybody, and we can call it something else if that's what it takes, and well, it doesn't have to be a committee. Having everybody be able to weigh in with an equal voice on the investments.
See, that's where I think we have a difference of thought and approach is I don't see having a committee structure as anyone having less of an opportunity or less of a voice. I see it as a two-step process where you take people with a smaller subset of the board, you do the deep dive, you come up with your best understanding, your best recommendations to the full board, then the full board, second bite at the cherry, goes through and in another fulsome conversation with that committee and those committee members. So you're actually, for the most important stuff, you're actually bringing an additional level of focus and scrutiny up front versus just bringing it to the full board. And, you know, we've got time issues, we've got staff issues, we've got all these things. Make that decision, you know, now and vote on it without the benefit of having a subset of the board really do that deep dive. That's where committee structures have come from. And to me, if there's any place we need that additional focus, it would be investment or pension and health. So I view the committee structure as adding real value, and while it may seem to be doing more in a way that you might say costs money to do a decision, you're not doing a decision twice. You're adding value to the actual decision-making process where the decision makers are the full board. You're just getting a lot of additional upfront work and concentration of focus and work and attention and dialogue with staff and experts and everything by the subcommittee. And those board members, if there's a board member who's not on the subcommittee, they have every opportunity to be there for all of it. And they can communicate their desire. You know, if I'm observing at, say, Perf and Comp, and I'm not on that committee, and I raise my hand and I want to be recognized, I'm recognized, and I'm not shy about saying, boy, I wish someone would make a motion to this effect. If I was on that committee, I think you ought to do that. And, you know, I have a reasonable expectation that the chair of that committee will say, well, yeah, I'll make that, or I'll consider that, or we'll discuss it, and it'll happen. So that's my take on it.
Specifically for investment, so I think that the integrity of our fiduciary role is chipped away by only having 6 or 7 members dive into that issue and then spread it around. Whereas when we all are in that committee, we spread that role equally, and we're all 100% responsible.
Rob?
Yeah, thank you. Jason, I don't disagree with you, but just let me set from my perspective, this didn't start with the Workstream group. This has come out from the VICO group that we had before, give us an evaluation, from the Funston group that gave us an evaluation, and now NACD. It was more industry best practices that they brought forward and said you shouldn't have a committee of the whole. And in the past, we've looked at it and it hasn't gone anywhere. But that's why it's here having a discussion. Is it didn't generate from this group. It came out of the best practices avenue.
Okay, Lisa?
Thank you. One of the goals that we had was certainly to get this conversation started, and so I think we've accomplished that. and there's not humor in that. I think that's very important. One of the issues that was arising in the conversations was, should a individual committee investment be treated differently than all of the others? And I think there's some very strong reasons for consistency of all of the committees, as well as some concerns as to why investment has been traditionally treated differently. I think if we are going to continue to treat investment differently and have it be a committee as a whole, I'm actually quite intrigued by Betty Yee's comment that pension and health should be a committee of a whole as well. And I think there would be perhaps less feeling that investment is somehow different if we took our two fundamental responsibilities and treated those as a committee as a whole. I am personally open to either approach, but I guess if I had a bias, it would be that we treat those two critical assignments in the same fashion.
Okay. Ramon?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we all are fiduciaries, whatever subcommittee we're on committees of the whole committee. And whether we're in a committee or not, I'm not on the compensation one, but we still have to make a decision whether we accept the committee's recommendation. I sit in on some of the subcommittee meetings, understand the deliberation. I may not do the deep dive, but I still take that vote very seriously. So I would say that I'm not against, I was, initially I had to raise my hand because I wasn't sure what established consistent structure of all board committees meant. Through the discussion, I understand what we're trying to do, that we should have one practice for our committees. And these are the recommendations. We may not agree, or the decision of the board may be that the pension committee, the investment committee should continue as investment committee of the whole. But I don't want that, if that is the decision, I don't want people to understand. I still would think it's a disservice if we think that one committee is more important than another. We all have to vote on each and every single item that comes to this board as the board. And whether the work is done at a committee level, a committee of the whole, or whatever the deliberation body is, it doesn't minimize our role that we have to do our homework. We have to follow the fiduciary principles that we're voting, because it's going to impact the participants, beneficiaries, and even the stakeholders, whether it's the employer or the active member. So I just want to make that statement because I haven't really said anything. I wanted to state that I'll just give it one more little bit. When I first came on this committee, my interest was the Pension and Health Committee. I wasn't on it, but I was still, because of the way the structure it works, I was able to participate. And I had no qualms speaking out, like Mr. Miller said. So I think it has worked for us. And if the goal is to try to be more efficient, give more to our beneficiaries and members, I think it's a good thing. If the goal is something else, to make sure that one committee is more important than others, I think that's the wrong approach. Thank you.
Margaret?
Thank you. I'd like to, we're not seconding anything, but I'd like to agree with Ms. Middleton's comment about the importance of pension and health. I mean, especially based on the conversations we've had over the last few days here about where we're going with healthcare and a lot of the changes and being leaders in that. I think it requires a lot of our attention. And I, too, was not on the Pension and Health Committee the first year. And when you don't get to vote, you're not the same. You're second class. And I like the idea of making a Pension Health Committee a committee of the whole. I think it's great. I think it actually ends up being less work, because what happens is when the vote comes back to the full Board of Administration and move approval and second, and I say no, I vote no on things, and then people want to know, why did you vote no? And so I'm responding to stakeholders or the press as to why I voted no or why I object. It's very problematic, and I think pension and health is the second biggest cost for us, and I think we should make that a committee of the whole. I know we're not deciding that today, but I really do like that idea, Ms. Middleton. Thank you.
Okay, I think the board members on this work stream got enough input to come back with, and we will, ultimately decide on which path to take, but I think it's enough information to move us to the next step on that item. Okay, before we go to the next work stream, let's take a break and 10 or 15, 10, 15, yeah, 15-minute break. 10:45? Okay. We'll come back.